The pen weighed down my hand like it didn't want to move. I kept shifting my eyes between the paperwork in front of me and the smug look on my husband's face across the dining table. He leaned back and said, "Sign it, or I'll make sure this divorce turns into a nightmare that lasts for years." I didn't argue. I signed my name, set my keys beside the documents, and walked out of the penthouse I owned without turning around once. The next morning, his attorney called him in a full-blown panic, yelling, "Do you have any idea what you just let her do?" But to understand how we got there, I need to rewind to the beginning. I met Marcus 6 years ago at a charity gala in downtown Seattle. I was 32 years old, newly promoted to lead architect at Morrison Design Group, and riding high on everything I'd worked for. He approached me near the silent auction table, flashing a confident smile in a perfectly tailored suit. He talked nonstop about his groundbreaking tech startup and how it was supposedly going to revolutionize the construction industry. Looking back now, the warning signs were obvious. He dropped important names every chance he got. He gave vague, slippery answers whenever I asked what his product actually did. He always insisted we split the bill because equality matters, even though I later found out his credit cards were completely maxed out. Still, I ignored it all. I was lonely. I'd spent my entire 20s grinding through 80-hour workweeks, choosing promotions over people, and building a career instead of a life. Marcus made me feel noticed. He asked how my day went and actually listened. He remembered my favorite wine. He brought lunch to my office on days I forgot to eat. We got married after dating for 18 months. My mother, God rest her soul, had passed away 2 years earlier, but she left me 3 things that meant more to me than anything else. The first was her vintage Cartier watch from the 1950s. The second was a collection of original watercolor paintings she'd created throughout her life. And the third was a handwritten letter reminding me to never let anyone dim my light. I kept the watch locked in my bedroom safe. The paintings were displayed all over our penthouse. The letter stayed in my nightstand, a quiet reminder of who I was and where I came from. The first year of marriage was solid. Marcus was attentive and encouraging, always talking about the next big idea. I didn't mind paying the bills while he tried to get his business off the ground. That's what partnership is about, right? By year 2, his startup collapsed. Investors walked away, and he blamed everything: the economy, bad timing, his former business partner. I held him while he cried and promised we'd get through it together. I also paid off the $30,000 in debt he'd racked up without ever telling me. In year 3, he launched another company. Then another. Each one needed startup cash, which I provided. And every single one folded within months. Around the same time, I was promoted to partner at my firm and earning $300,000 a year. Marcus, meanwhile, was earning nothing but excuses. By year 4, he didn't even pretend to work anymore. He spent his days golfing. Business lunches stretched into dinners. He started buying designer clothes, claiming he had to look successful to become successful. I should have walked away then, but I kept hearing my mother's voice in my head, telling me that marriage takes patience and that good men sometimes need time to find their way. Then I found the messages. It was a Tuesday night. Marcus had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he showered. A notification lit up the screen from someone named Sophia Chan, complete with a heart emoji. The message read, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow, baby. Wear that shirt I bought you." My hand shook as I opened the thread. 6 months. 6 months of "I love you. You're the only one who understands me. And once I get my share of the divorce, we'll be set for life." I looked up Sophia Chen. She was an Instagram influencer with over 200,000 followers, posting lifestyle content. And in one of her recent photos I saw it, my mother's Cartier watch on her wrist. The same watch I thought I'd misplaced 3 months earlier. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw his phone through the window. I wanted to drag him out of the shower and demand answers. Instead, I took screenshots, emailed them to myself, and put his phone back exactly where he'd left it. That night, Marcus slept beside me like nothing was wrong. I stayed awake planning. I thought about my mother's paintings still hanging on the walls. I thought about the prenup Marcus had talked me into tearing up on our first anniversary, saying, "We're partners now. We don't need legal barriers." And I thought about the 5 years I'd spent supporting a man who was secretly plotting to take half of everything I'd built. The next morning, I called my old college roommate. Helen Park was now one of the most respected family law attorneys in Washington state. We hadn't talked in months, but she picked up on the second ring. "I need help," I told her. "And I need this kept quiet." We met at her office that afternoon. I showed her everything, the messages, the financial records proving Marcus hadn't contributed to the household in 4 years, the destroyed prenup, and the photos of my mother's watch on Sophia's wrist. Helen leaned back in her chair and sighed. "Here's the problem, Elena. Without that prenup, he could go after half of everything, including assets you brought into the marriage if they've been mixed together." Then she smiled. "But I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've learned that the best move is letting your opponent think they've already won." I asked her what she meant. "We're going to let Marcus believe he outplayed you," she said. "And by the time he realizes the truth, it'll be too late." For the next 6 months, Helen and I worked quietly behind the scenes. I transferred the penthouse into a revocable living trust, classifying it as my separate property since I'd bought it years before meeting Marcus using my mother's inheritance. The paperwork was buried so deep he never noticed. I restructured my ownership stake at the design firm, protecting it as separate property through a series of legal adjustments my partners were happy to approve. I documented every expense Marcus charged to my credit cards, every failed investment I funded, and every piece of jewelry he'd borrowed to give to someone else. And most importantly, I installed security cameras throughout the penthouse, disguised as smoke detectors. Washington requires two-party consent for audio recording, so I made sure they only captured video. That was more than enough. The video footage showed everything. It captured Marcus and Sophia inside my home while I was at work. I watched them rummage through my closet, dig through my jewelry box, and flip through my personal files like they belonged to them. One clip showed Sophia slipping on my mother's earrings, laughing as she joked that I'd never even noticed they were missing. Another showed the two of them carefully boxing up 3 of my mother's paintings and carrying them out to her car. The day I realized those paintings were gone, I nearly collapsed. I came home and stared at the empty spaces on the walls where my mother's artwork had hung for years. My chest felt hollow. I called Marcus and forced my voice to stay calm. "Have you seen my mom's paintings?" I asked. "The ones from the living room?" "Oh, those old things," he said casually. "I donated them to free up some wall space. They were kind of depressing anyway." Donated. He had handed them to his mistress and called them depressing. My mother had spent decades creating those paintings. An appraiser might have valued them at a few $1,000s, but to me they were priceless. They were her hands, her vision, her love frozen in time. I locked myself in the bathroom, sat on the floor, and cried silently for an hour. Then I wiped my face, fixed my makeup, and went right back to the plan. Helen had prepared a very specific document for Marcus. On the surface, it looked like a simple agreement outlining the division of minor assets during our separation. Hidden deep in the legal language was a clause stating that Marcus acknowledged receiving full and final compensation for any claims to property acquired during the marriage. The key was getting him to sign it without actually reading it. Thankfully, Marcus had never read anything carefully a day in his life. 3 weeks ago, he came to me with his own list of demands. He'd spoken to a lawyer, some bargain bin attorney who had probably told him he was entitled to half of everything. "I want the penthouse," he declared over dinner. "Half of your partnership stake and monthly spousal support until I get back on my feet." I put on a performance. I argued. I cried. I let my voice crack. I let him think he'd crushed me. "Fine," I finally said, sounding defeated. "But my attorney says you need to sign this acknowledgement of our asset division first." Just a formality. Marcus barely skimmed the pages before signing. He was too busy texting Sophia about how they were going to celebrate their big win. And that brings us back to where I started. The document I signed 3 days ago, the one that made it look like I was handing over the penthouse, was actually a quitclaim deed with no legal power whatsoever. The penthouse had already been protected inside my trust. That deed meant absolutely nothing. Marcus didn't know that. What he also didn't realize was that the document he had signed earlier officially stated that he'd already received full compensation and waived any future claims to my property. The morning after I walked out, Marcus woke up in what he thought was now his penthouse. He tried to make coffee, but the smart home system didn't recognize his voice anymore. I'd revoked his access the night before. He called building management to override it, only to be told his name wasn't on the ownership paperwork. It never had been. The trust owned the penthouse, and I was the sole trustee. He decided to leave and get coffee somewhere else. His Tesla wouldn't start. It was registered in my name, paid for with my money, and I'd remotely disabled it through the app. He tried calling an Uber. Every credit card he had was tied to my account. All declined. Then he tried calling Sophia. She didn't answer. Sophia was a little busy dealing with the Seattle Police Department, who had just arrived at her apartment with a search warrant for stolen property. My security footage clearly showed her removing my mother's paintings from my home. Helen had filed the police report the day before, and the King County prosecutor took serious interest in an Instagram influencer with documented evidence of receiving stolen goods. They found everything at her apartment: my mother's Cartier watch, her pearl earrings, the emerald ring that once belonged to my grandmother. All 3 paintings were still in their original frames, leaning against her bedroom wall like trophies. Sophia was charged with possession of stolen property and conspiracy to commit theft. Her influencer career, built on luxury and image, unraveled almost instantly. Brands don't like being associated with accused criminals, and her 200,000 followers watched in real time as her curated life fell apart. Marcus wasn't doing any better. He was served legal papers at the penthouse that no longer belonged to him. Helen had filed a civil lawsuit for conversion of property, unjust enrichment, and fraud. We were seeking the full value of every item he'd stolen and given away, plus damages. His discount lawyer reviewed the stack of documents Marcus had signed over the past 6 months and, from what I was told, completely lost it. That was when Marcus received the phone call I mentioned earlier, his own attorney screaming at him for signing away his rights without reading the fine print. "She played you," the lawyer reportedly said. "Every document you signed was designed to trap you. You have no claim to the penthouse, no claim to her business, and now you're exposed to theft and fraud charges. How did you not see this coming?" Marcus called me 17 times that day. I didn't pick up. Instead, I sat in a suite at the Four Seasons with a glass of champagne, watching the Seattle skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Helen checked in every few hours with updates. All of my mother's belongings had been recovered. Sophia was out on bail but facing serious charges. Marcus's civil case was going to cost him what little he had, and follow him for years. "There's one more thing," Helen said. "His attorney is trying to void the documents he signed, claiming duress or fraud on your part." I laughed. Good luck. Every document had been witnessed, notarized, and reviewed by independent counsel. Marcus had chosen not to read them. That wasn't my problem. "Exactly," Helen said. "The motion will be denied. You'll walk away with everything you had before you met him, plus damages, and the satisfaction of watching him explain to a judge why he gave his mistress his wife's family heirlooms." The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. Marcus walked away with nothing. Actually, that's not true. He walked away owing money. The court ordered him to pay restitution for every item he had stolen and sold or handed off over the years. That included my grandmother's silver tea set, books from my father's personal collection, and a dozen small things he'd taken quietly, assuming I wouldn't notice or wouldn't care. Sophia pleaded guilty to a reduced charge. She was sentenced to probation and community service, and she had to return everything Marcus had given her. On top of that, she was required to issue a public apology. Her influencer career never bounced back. The last I heard, she was working behind a cosmetics counter at a department store. About as far from the luxury life she once showed off online as you can get. Marcus moved back in with his mother in Spokane. No penthouse. No Tesla. No designer wardrobe. Just a man pushing 45 with no career, no savings, and a reputation that followed him every time someone typed his name into Google. Some people would say I was cruel, that I should have just divorced him, cut my losses, and started over. But those people have never held their dying mother's hand and promised to protect her legacy. They've never watched a stranger wear their grandmother's jewelry on social media. They've never heard their husband dismiss priceless family artwork as depressing. I wasn't cruel. I was thorough. Last week, I rehung my mother's paintings in the penthouse. I placed her Cartier watch back into my bedroom safe, right next to the letter she wrote me, the one I still read whenever I need strength. I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by everything she left me, and finally allowed myself to grieve. I cried for the marriage I thought I had. I cried for the years I spent loving someone who never deserved it. I cried for my mother, who would have seen through Marcus in 5 minutes if she'd been alive to meet him. Then I wiped my eyes, poured myself a glass of wine, and raised it to the empty room. To new beginnings, I said, and to never letting anyone dim my light. The penthouse was silent. The city glowed below, and for the first time in 6 years I felt like myself again. My mother always believed the truth finds its way to the surface. She used to say liars and cheaters eventually have to face their own reflection. She also believed strong women don't chase revenge. They remove the obstacles and let karma handle the rest. I didn't go looking for revenge. I just stopped shielding Marcus from the consequences of his own choices. I stopped paying his bills, covering his mistakes, and pretending not to notice when things disappeared. I stopped being his safety net. And without me there to catch him, he fell. Some nights I still wonder if I could have handled things differently. If I had confronted him about Sophia the moment I saw those texts, would it have ended better? Would we have talked honestly about where our marriage went wrong? Then I remember the way he laughed with her about stealing from me. I remember him calling my mother's paintings depressing. I remember him planning to take half of everything I built while contributing nothing but lies for 5 years. No. There was no honest conversation waiting there. There was only removal, like cutting out a tumor before it spreads. Helen and I still meet for lunch once a month. She's more than my attorney now. She's proof that the women you struggle alongside in your 20s sometimes turn into the people who save you in your 40s. You know the best part? She told me at our last lunch. His own attorney basically called him an idiot in open court. Said he'd never seen a client so completely outplayed by their spouse. The judge actually laughed. I smiled, not because I enjoyed Marcus's humiliation, but because it confirmed what I had always known. I was never the naive wife he thought I was. I was a woman who built a career, earned a partnership, and bought a penthouse long before I ever met him. I'm my mother's daughter, and we don't break easily. If you're listening to this and seeing pieces of your own story in mine, I want you to hear this clearly. Document everything. Find a good attorney. And never let anyone make you feel unreasonable for wanting to protect what's yours. My husband thought he was the smartest person in the room. He believed charm and empty promises would be enough to take everything I worked for. He was wrong. Now every morning I wake up in my penthouse. I make coffee in a smart kitchen that only responds to my voice. I look at my mother's paintings hanging on walls that belong to me and me alone. That isn't revenge. That's justice. If you've made it this far, I'd love to know, what would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted Marcus right away? Or walked away and let him take whatever he wanted? And if you've lived through something similar, please know you're not alone. There are more of us than you realize, people who loved deeply, trusted freely, and learned the hard way that not everyone deserves that loyalty. Here's what I've learned. The same strength that keeps us loyal to the wrong people can make us unstoppable once we turn it back toward ourselves. My mother understood that. She raised me to live by it. And now finally I am. Thank you for listening to my story. This is Elena signing off from Seattle, where the rain has finally cleared. The sun is pouring through my windows, and the paintings that matter most are home where they belong.